What do you think it is but with boys and cars or men and cars? Is it, I mean, I'm trying to think of what it is. I'm not necessarily a car guy, but now that I've read about your story, I had my '68 Mustang when I was in high school, and I was all over that thing when I was 16 to 18. And so is it something about the body of the car and the female figure, or is it the fact that as men, we're not encouraged to be creative and we can be creative with our cars? Have you ever thought about what the attraction is?
I think it's everything. I think, there's a lot of different equations as to that answer to that question. One is freedom. To me, my story, I fell in love with Porsche as a 10-year-old, but I didn't buy my first Porsche until I was 22. I bought my first car a few years earlier, which was a 1977 Toyota Corolla 2TC that I bought for $200. When I lived in Sheffield, I was there till I was 19, but all my adult responsibility was really in the States. When I was living in Sheffield, I was at home on the dole, living at my mum and dad's house, doing odd jobs. So there was no real sense of freedom there. It was sort of in this channel of going nowhere fast. So when I bought my first car several years later, once I'd been in LA for a few years, instantly represented freedom. But to backtrack to a 10-year-old when I didn't know what freedom was, it just looked cool and fast. The shapes, intoxicating. So I see friends that have kids. Kids are 3, 4, 5 years old. I give them toy models, and they just like whizzing them around on the floor, on the tabletop. It just seems a natural thing for boys to play with cars when you're young.
Yeah.
And you either grow out of it or you don't. And I think a lot of people never grow out of that.
Yeah, the freedom issue is big because when I was 16, you get your license in the States at 16, and the car meant so much of freedom.
Yeah.
It meant you didn't have to do what your parents said, and meant you could do all those things. People say today that the internet is now people's freedom because now they can associate with their friends, and you don't necessarily have to get to places.
Yeah, the internet's different though because you never leave your home.
Right.
The car, you actually go out there and experience stuff in the real world as opposed to the virtual world.
Right.
And for me, I never had a car in England, never had a car in Sheffield, never even had a driver's license. So as a kid, my father watched motorsports. I vividly remember watching F1 in the 70s. Mid-70s in England was a glory era, 76, 77. It's documented in the film Rush. We had James Hunt, 1976 world champion on 4 wheels, Formula One. We also had Barry Sheene, 2-wheel world champion.
So you remember that in your childhood?
I remember that era. I mean, you've got to remember England is an automotive country. Yeah, Detroit's an automotive legendary city, and the Ford Motor Company and Henry Ford and the Model T. The birth of it was in the States, but you've got to remember England had a thriving car industry in the 50s and 60s. I mean, all these just iconic cars that are not Porsche 911s, a lot of them were English cars. The Austin Mini Cooper, E-Type Jag, Aston Martin DB5. So as a kid, you grow up, you watch James Bond. James Bond's driving an Aston Martin. There's a lot of visual exposure and stimulation to the automobile. I remember watching James Bond driving the Aston Martin. I remember watching a show called The Persuaders, where it was Roger Moore and Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis was driving a Ferrari Dino. I remember watching Dukes of Hazzard, where they're driving a Dodge Charger, the American muscle car. Yeah. Steve McQueen driving the '68 Mustang in Bullet.
Bullet, yeah.
So as a kid growing up anywhere in the world, I mean, my story was Porsche, but the influences are out there if you just turn on the TV. I used to watch a lot of motorsport. Occasionally we'd go to racetracks such as Donington and Mallory Park and Cadwell Park and watch amateur club racing. Even though we didn't have much money, my dad was pretty mechanical and would work on his buddies' cars and stuff like that. So I was exposed to the car at an early age, and it never really went away.